All right, today we're jumping into one of the wildest, most striking metaphors in the entire New Testament. It comes from the Apostle Paul, and it's about a kind of pain that is, well, it's personal, it's deep, and it's honestly pretty strange. So let's get right into it. So there it is. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul, a man, says he's feeling the pains of childbirth. I mean, just let that sink in for a second. It's a really jarring image, isn't it? He's writing to this community that he loves, a community he founded, and he feels this intense, creative agony for them.
So, what on earth did he mean by that? This is the central question we're going to unpack. What is this pain exactly? And what is this birth that he's so desperate to see happen? Believe me, this is way more than just poetic language. It's the key to understanding his entire mission. Okay, so first things first, let's break down this whole childbirth metaphor. To really get what Paul is saying, we have to kind of reframe how we think about this specific kind of pain. This isn't about punishment, and it's not about meaningless suffering.
See, Paul's drawing a really clear line in the sand. On one side, you've got just plain old suffering, but on the other, you have creative pain. Think about a craftsman, toiling away, pouring everything they have into a masterpiece. That struggle has a goal, a beautiful result at the end. It's pain with a point.
And get this, Jesus himself used this exact same metaphor. In the Gospel of John, he talked about this temporary anguish, the sorrow and trouble of labor, but it gets completely overshadowed by the joy of a new life. That joy is so huge that the memory of the crisis just fades away. And that's the feeling Paul is tapping into here. A difficult, intense struggle for a permanent, joyful result. So if Paul is going through this creative, purposeful pain, what's he trying to birth? What's the end goal of all this struggle? The goal is the formation of Christ within the believers. This is so much more than just teaching them a bunch of rules. We're talking about a deep internal transformation where their very character, their mindset, their nature actually starts to look like Jesus.
And this wasn't some vague, abstract idea for him. Nope. Paul was looking for real, tangible qualities. He wanted to see Christ's love in how they acted, his peace in their community, his humility in how they treated each other. He literally wanted them to adopt Jesus's mindset, tap into his spiritual power, and understand his wisdom. This was the new person he was laboring so hard to bring into the world.
But this whole transformation thing, well, it wasn't going so smoothly. The reason Paul said he felt this pain again was because the process had stalled out. There were 3 huge obstacles getting in the way of this spiritual birth. The first one was an outside force. Paul was convinced there was an active spiritual deception happening. He called it the god of this world, and its main job was to put blinders on people, to keep them from seeing the goal clearly. Which makes sense, right? If you can't even see your destination, how are you ever going to get there? And he talks about this directly in another one of his letters. He says this spiritual blindness is what keeps people from seeing the light of the gospel, which is the very thing that's supposed to transform them into the image of Christ in the first place. All right, obstacle number 2 was how the world was reacting to them. So when you choose a path of spiritual transformation, when you start to live differently, well, it often invites opposition. As these believers started to change, the world around them pushed back. And all that hardship, all that struggle could easily make them lose heart and just abandon the whole journey. But Paul saw this as just part of the deal. It was an unavoidable reality. He even wrote to his protege Timothy and basically said, look, if you're trying to live a godly life, you're going to be persecuted. It wasn't a sign they were failing. It was an expected part of the process, a test of their commitment. And that brings us to the third obstacle, which was this really powerful pressure from both inside and out. This is the pull of the status quo. I think we can all relate to this one. It's that temptation to just stop changing, to fit back in with how the world works, and just let the whole transformation process grind to a halt. It's basically the spiritual version of giving up and going back to your old habits. Paul tackles this head on. He frames it as a choice, plain and simple. You can either be conformed by the world around you, letting it press you into its mold, or you can be transformed from the inside out by completely renewing your mind. So you've got these 3 massive forces pushing back: deception, persecution, and corruption. What was Paul's game plan? How was he going to overcome all that and finish the spiritual birth? Well, he brings in another powerful metaphor. He saw the believers as clay and himself as the potter's hands, guided by God.
His labor, these childbirth pains, it wasn't just him sitting around and worrying. No, it was active work. He wanted to visit them, to change his tone, to work with them directly to help mold and guide them back into the shape they were meant to have, the image of Christ.
Paul uses this potter and clay idea in his other writings too. It's his way of calling for submission to this whole creative process. I mean, the clay doesn't argue with the potter, right? For this transformation to actually work, the believers had to allow themselves to be shaped.
And this really lays out the whole path forward. Step 1, you have to become clay. Be willing to be molded. Step 2, you renew your mind. That's how the change happens, from the inside out. And finally, step 3, you put on the new self. You have to actually live it out, to show that new character in the real world.
And this is the ultimate goal. This is what Paul was laboring for. Not just a slightly improved person, but a new creation, a complete spiritual rebirth, where the old ways are totally gone and a new life, a life patterned after Christ, has truly started. Now that was the joy that would make all the pain worthwhile. So, that leaves us with a final thought. Paul was writing all this nearly 2,000 years ago, but this idea, this metaphor of a creative struggle that leads to an internal transformation, it's absolutely timeless. And it kind of begs the question for us, right here, right now, what does it really mean to become a new creation in the world today? Definitely something to think about.